right, I just wanted to make a quick video because people had mentioned this in the recent past after I post a video or something. But a lot of people talk about culling the bass at Lake Castaic because there seems to be an overwhelming amount of like half-pound bass. Most of the people that make those comments, they just started fishing at that lake, and they don't really know what they're talking about. Some people, they don't fish there often enough or have a history of the lake and an understanding of how those giant bass in the 90s grew to be so big, because that is always somebody's argument, is like, there's too many small bass, there's no more 20-pounders, blah, blah, blah. There's still big fish in that lake. You just can't catch them. That's it. I can't either. I don't fish with the big swim baits nearly as often as I would like to, mostly because I rent boats, and it's very expensive to rent a boat and not catch any fish for however many trips it takes before you land a big fish. And it's just, anyone who fishes with the big swim baits, they know that, you can go an entire month and only get maybe 2 or 3 bites. And for me, renting a boat is just not worth it. I'm trying to make content. I'm trying to make videos. I also want to catch fish. If I have my own boat, I would probably spend more time with the big swim baits. But anyway, beside the point. So at the big lake of Castaic, the other argument is that the stripers, are interfering in, the bass getting, giant. Now, here's the thing. And some of the guys that have been fishing there for a long time, they understand this, and they understand the history of the lake. The reason why that reservoir had giant 20-plus pound bass in it in the early days, in the 90s, was because they were F1 hybrids, which is when you, mix a Florida bass with a northern bass, and it's the first generation. As their offspring reproduces and and it keeps going down the genetic line, the genes get, I forget the scientific term, but I have done some research on this. And the genes just get, weaker and weaker, so they don't produce that robust offspring that can grow, hugely. These hybrids, that grow massive. I've said this before. The other thing is, when that reservoir opened up and it got all the water in it and all that stuff. I mean, it's 300 feet deep. It's cold water. It's clear water. And the other key ingredient, aside from the F1 hybrids, was the stocking of the smaller, 6 to 8 inch rainbow trout, which in the wintertime, they would stock them like every other week. Guys that have been there forever, ask Jim, DJ, guys like that, they know that, they've seen that. And so those bass got that big because of those reasons. There was tons of pressure back then. There's pictures of, 100 boats, just near the marina all over the place trying to catch these giant bass when it was the heyday. The other thing is those giant 20-plus pounders, and I just feel like I got to say this all the time, they were caught on live bait, crawfish, which you're not allowed to fish with anymore. So, maybe those fish are still in there. I don't know the lifespan of those fish, but it's probably not 30 years. The other thing, too, about the culling is, you have no idea. Most bass, they grow at the same rate for about 6 months. And then the genes kick in, and some of them get bigger, some of them sort of grow at a normal pace. So you don't know what a 1-pound bass, how old that is. You can guess, but you don't really know. And I've said this before in the videos. The oldest bass ever recorded, which was about 19 years old, was only 4 pounds. Okay, so it's all about genetics, has not really a lot to do with how old it is. So if you're out there culling fish that you think are a year or 2 old, you have no idea. You have no idea what the genes are in those fish, is the point. The other big thing about this lake is there is not a lot of structure. Now that the water level is down, 100 feet or whatever it is, you can see that there is no structure, which means there's no places for the bait to hide. The most of the bait, whether it's the silver sides or the shad or whatever, they go into the very, very, very shallow coves, in a couple inches of water. And then there's a couple spots where there's some dead trees in the water, but there's hardly any cover there. And that's going to affect the forage, and that's going to affect a lot of things with how the bass grow and how the bass feed. Again, the striper have been in there for this same amount of time. They've been in there since the 90s, I think. And there's upwards of, 30 plus pound fish in there. They're not really, it's not really affecting the bass. It really isn't. And I'll tell you a story. It was only maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3 now. They did a kids derby for trout, and it was in April, and they had been stocking the lake with trout, kind of the bigger ones, like the brood stock, for the weeks leading up to that. And it was getting warm out, so I knew this would be the last time they stocked the trout, and it was just for the kids derby. So they stocked it with trout, and I went there to fish for bass and everything. And as I went through the marina, I went through first thing in the morning and then later on. The biggest bass I've ever seen in that lake were lurking around the marina. And my man, oh God, what's his name? Armin, I think his name is, who caught that, I think, 36-pounder, who makes his own swim baits and everything. He told me that day I ran into him that he caught like a 15-pound bass and it shook the swim bait. I believe the guy. He catches big fish. I saw these fish lurking around. Again, this is only 2 years ago, maybe 3, whenever that was. He caught that big striper. It was later in that year. So those giant bass were there because the little, 8-inch rainbow trout were there, and it was starting to get warmer, so the bass were more active. So I've seen those fish, the teeners, I've seen them in there. Also, the thing with big bass is, they will pick a spot to feed in the summertime, right? And they will stay there. Now, if the water level is fluctuating, getting colder, up whatever. And also, here's the other thing. Even if the aqueduct, they're not letting water in or whatever, we have these crazy wind days, right? When the Santa Anas are blowing, and especially like January, February, sometimes March, April, when the wind is blowing and blowing for days, 20-something miles an hour, that's going to affect the temperature as well, and the fish are going to react to that. So these big bass, they usually pick a spot to feed in the summertime. If the water's fluctuating, they're going to go towards deeper water, colder water, more oxygen-rich water. They don't have to feed as much. So in a reservoir that big, that means they're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper. So that's why those big bass are harder to catch, They're still there. So the other big deal about that lake, why you can't just cull willy-nilly and take out all these small fish, is because, the draining and raising of the water levels has such a huge effect on the fish. So the water temperature is the most important thing, okay? And when they raise and lower that, they're putting that cold aqueduct water in there, the snow melt, and basically it shuts the fish off, sends them deeper, does all kinds of stuff to the bait. It prevents the algae from growing, all these things that affect the food chain. So again, it has nothing to do with the striper. It has nothing to do with too many small bass. When you see, like this year, there's so many little bass schooling all over the place and lots of baby striper and stuff like that, that's a good sign. That means that lake is active. That means there's plenty of bait going on. That means the whole system is working. So that is always good. And again, if you're not catching big bass, A, you're not fishing for them. Okay. And B, you just don't know how to catch them at that lake. It is a very tricky lake. In my heyday there, which was maybe 4 years ago, I was catching lots of 4, 5, and 6 pound fish. We'd see 7 and 8 pounders caught, a couple of 9s, and it was pretty often. And there was maybe a little less pressure at that time than there is now because of COVID. There's tons of pressure out on the lake, and everybody's trying to catch fish, and they're seeing everything. But, the fish were still biting. So, and the lake was very, very high back then. There were some coves that they just don't exist now, and they did a few years ago. So, the water levels, the temperatures, and the cover for those fish have just a way bigger effect on, the fish and the fishing than, all these little bass, running around. Whatever. I just don't believe in the culling because I'm not a biologist. You're not a biologist. You think that a massive reservoir like this, you have no idea what the effect that is going to do. It's not a little pond. If it's a farm pond and you can kind of guesstimate how many fish are in there and how much forage is in there, etc., yeah, then maybe culling might be right. But a massive reservoir like this where you have no idea of the numbers and what the actual state of the fishery is based on except, 1 or 2 trips that you've taken in the past year, that's not enough science to start culling fish if you don't know what you're doing. That's my personal opinion. You don't just, have a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, I'm only catching small fish. We should cull the small fish. Well, then chances are you won't catch anything. That's just that's my guess. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I got a fishing video coming up in a couple of days, so stay tuned for that. Subscribe, all that good stuff. Comment. Let me know what you think about this. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about the lake and culling in general. All right. Thanks for watching.